You have until the second week in March to come up with approximately the same number of people that's averaging meeting here now qualified. You know what that means? Salesman talk, not people just off the street, but people that have seen the tape, seen me on TV, that are extremely interested, prepared to meet once a week. And if that's not accomplished by the second week in March, I'm closing down the operation here. And you people out of town, there's not much you can do about that, except I'll point out that if I do close up here, then whatever participation you have now of getting the tapes out there, it will affect you somewhere between, the effect will be detrimental, somewhere between that and fatal. And you people here, don't involve me with it. I don't care what you do. I'm not going to meet with the people until they're ready to go, assuming you get that number of people. You can do anything you want to, and except whenever you meet with them, whoever is running a meeting or whatever you do is point out to them that you do not speak for me. But other than that, I'll leave it to you. I assume that's clear. Second week in March, if you don't have a group of people, I ain't even count heads, but about equal to what's average meeting here, pre-qualified, people anxious to do it once a week. I'm closing out, and that's it. Once upon a time, a man set out on a miraculous journey, and after some years of effort, he became so tired that he couldn't tell whether he was actually moving any longer or was just asleep and dreaming he was. The man had a name, and yes, perhaps that was the ultimate problem. Everyone lives in a fable, but the awakened are aware of it. As generally perceived, reality is a 3D engine run on 2D fuel. The truck of perspective put in unknown gears. Sometimes when his personal problems were getting the best of him, one man would go out at night in his backyard and stare up at the vast expanse of the heavens and say, "Boy, you stars got it made not to have the kind of problems that I do." Neural garden update. Fountains can overflow and spill on the ground or not, but either way, all water will return to aquifer earth. How it is handled in the meantime is what interests the alert. The practice of poverty is not exclusive to the mystical. Those asleep have poverty also. Poverty of possibility. What ordinary minds are wont to refer to as the truth, if it operationally exists as they imagine, would be allegory with no one to speak its name. To routine hearing, it is the universal silence that seems so threatening. Or, as soon as Adam could see, God poked his eye out. How to be sure that you'll always give a damn about something. Always think about something. And the majestic potential of your own nervous system mystical journey. The only explanation for failure is failure, and all possibilities are possible. After the first 4,000 miles, you should begin ignoring all road signs. Master, said a young monk, its simplicity is starting to become clear. But not yet enough, he replied. There does remain the ever-lurking viscidity indigenous to garrulous passengers missing the scenery. Master, said a young monk, at times the train seems to unaccountably move faster and other times unexpectedly slower. Where is the consistency? Where is my control? The friction between you and the track, he replied, must be lessened. High school scholastic update. Life as routinely lived is just a science experiment. Question: how to put a lion to sleep? Answer: cause him to think about forests. And a man responds: first fish and now lions. I just hope you're not finally going to turn this on man. Too late, sir, much too late. The art of war and strategy is practiced by the blind, seeking advice from the losing side. Footnote: religion is exempt from this because it says that it is. As he lay dying, the master of the mystical school gave these instructions to his heir apparent. Never tell those who come here for enlightenment what they should specifically do. Oh, you can once, just as an entry exam. Like when you first meet them, tell them to sit down. And if they do, tell them never to do that again. And if they don't, ask them if they're deaf. And in this way, you can make perfectly clear to yourself their suitability. And upon hearing these words, his successor dropped dead. How come you can't? An idea update. Words to grown consciousness are like a fourth wheel on a tricycle. If this seems unclear, just check what your mind wants to do with it. For himself, one man selected the name 6:30, just so he'd never be late. Whenever he was asleep, distracted, or otherwise away from his post, one man began to wonder just how much was actually being lost. Throughout the ancient mystical traditions, it has been said that you alone must make this journey, and no one else can do it for you. But as many have non-verbally suspected, this is not an absolute truth. Why do you think that those who know always have such inviting coattails? Spotters update. Cows run in herds, not the awakened. Note, religion again says it is immune from this for the same reason as before. What is the difference between being blind and being asleep? And if you don't rightly know, then in your case, it doesn't matter anyway. A man who had been there said, strange it may sound, but now it is only when I think that I don't know what I'm doing. To try and talk about the thing itself publicly, you can go one of two ways. You can water it down to make it available to the widest possible audience, or you can pare it down to its bare essentials to appeal to the diehards. But in either instance, you've done it some degree of harm. Now, just imagine what you do to yourself when you talk to yourself about it. Buddha laid back down and said, wake me when it's over. All over. From the Mystic's Dictionary, biography, suicide. One of the more assured ways not to find it. Go somewhere to look for it. Tonight's revisitation of the distinction. Thought is in the head, consciousness is not. Reality, today's final and absolute definition. Reality, things as per no one's description. Instead of dancing, sitting, or posturing, at one mystery school, their sole physical ritual consisted of everyone continually pushing against an unyielding wall. And oh yeah, everyone had to bring their own wall, as if they had a choice. After the party update, one man attempted to drive everyone home, but not everyone knew where they lived or wanted to live. Layers upon layers, secrets upon secrets. Men search for the magic glove when the true prize is the fist within. Genealogy update. All metaphors are related. All true yogis and mystics eventually think, damn, I'm sick and tired of yoga and mysticism. Horseshoes update. True originality of thought is not the awakening, but it sure is close. The weapon of the warrior is a sword that eats and eats and eats and eats till it's eaten itself out of a job. And the Sufis again chimed in, God, but I'm sick of Sufism. We were talking last time about poverty and about how it always been an integral part of all known religions, all known would-be apparent mystical systems and traditions, and how it is even an inseparable part of the common cultures of the world, all the way from mythologies, history being a form of cultural fiction, into modern-day movies of a man with no possessions, that if a man amounts to anything, if he is going to look heroic, if he is going to be a Hercules, an Atlas in Greek mythology, or if he's going to be the man without a name riding into a western town in 20th century western movies, the man always is sans possessions. He only has what he has in his hand, on his back, on the back of his horse. And I pointed out to you, whether you actually considered it, that men, I assure you, writers have never sat and considered writing it otherwise. It just flows naturally, which is part of the structure of the human nervous system as reflected externally. But think yourself, would it fit? It's beyond answering the question directly, but can you even picture a hero? We're talking about the kind that the allegorical, or at least the mythical, in an allegorical sense, such as the American Westerns. This guy riding into town, there's trouble, there's injustice going on, and you know he's the hero. Let's say Clint Eastwood or John Wayne and all that, and he rides in. What if? Can you imagine that kind of hero coming in with, unless it was some extraneous part of the plot, but can you picture him riding in a chuck wagon, in a prairie schooner, with a wife and a whole bunch of kids? Well, I don't mean to confuse it. All right, alone, but this whole wagon, just full of all his possessions, all of his books, I don't care what. No. I mean, I figured maybe you'd laugh because there's nothing else you can do. You'll never see it. No one will think to do it. It goes against not just the grain of fiction, not just the grain of cultural habits and what you're accustomed to. It goes against the nervous system. There is something in man's nervous system, as always. It is only the children, it's only people with the hobby of horizontal street-level education who think that there are cultural reasons for cultural norms. That would think, if they listen to this, that they could explain why we're in the habit, at least perhaps in the Western world, which is not true, it's true in other parts of the world, but that we're simply accustomed to heroes being men of very few physical possessions that seem to have very few ties, and they could, in fact, I can stand here and do it now that I said it, and give a psychological description that, well, heroes can't have a great number of ties, or they cannot go out and do the great deeds. You cannot have the knights of King Arthur's day, or you cannot have the samurais out doing the bidding of their liege and the warlords. You cannot have them doing that if they are saddled with all sorts of personal responsibilities, not only family and etc., but physical possessions, worrying about making a house payment. They simply cannot go out and do heroic deeds. Yeah. But you got to be better than that. That's nothing. It is part of the human nervous system. It is a part of it. It is genetic. It is molecular. But what is it? What is afoot that the only way, or that the way that it seems to be absolutely apropos for a hero, what does it represent for him to be almost bereft of any physical possessions, just the absolute bare minimum? And why does it go all the way from the heroes in the sense of a mythological or warlike hero into that of the spiritual realm? But you can't imagine a Buddha or Jesus or a Moses dragging around all this stuff with him everywhere. Yeah, it's hard to even imagine him think about it because there are no records of having a house. Or if he has a house, can you imagine having to go deal with the bankers and trying to refinance it and come up with the house payments? There's something there's something wrong with the picture. Like I said, it doesn't even pop up, should show you something. There are no heroes such as that. The poverty, if you can see it the first time, the most simplistic level, as we were hitting on last time, I was going to extend it for you. It starts out physical, simple men of the world. They see the poverty aspect as being physical possessions, that if there is something indeed worthy of trying to exercise poverty, it would be at the physical realm. That will include all of those pursuing some known public religious path. That's all they know to do. That's all that seems appropriate. They do not even think about any further than that. If indeed someone decided, as used some parts of the world, is still not unexpected, that a man will give up his ordinary life, usually at some later stage in his, chronologically speaking, at age 50 or 60, when all his children are gone, when his wife's dead. There are all sorts of little different schemes wherein this is found to be acceptable, that it's not unusual for a man who had been just an ordinary citizen to chuck it all in and go and move into a Zen monastery, move in with a yogi somewhere, move in to a Christian monastery, to just give up his life and devote the rest of his days to some sort of spiritual search. It's not unusual at all. Some parts of the world it seems to be more appropriate and expected than other parts. But in any case, if a man decides to do it, what does he give up? He doesn't even question it. And it may be large amounts of money. It may be that he turns his back on a lifetime of collection of possessions. And it can seem to be, for those outside, especially people as small and as physical and as greedy as he is, it can seem to be astounding, if not insane. How can he do that? And to the person involved and to outside simple observers, it seems to be that he has made a quite adequate sacrifice because he gave up his possessions. He said, somebody else take it over, here to all my kids, here it is, I sign it over to you. In perpetuity, it's just yours, I'm leaving, I'm going to the monastery, and they won't allow me to come in with anything except the shirt on my back anyway, so it's yours and bye. And there he goes off for what few years he has left. That seems to be a real sacrifice, as I said, especially to those who would envy his possessions. If you take it a little bit further, that covers all religion, that covers way up in the high 90% of every form, every attempted exercise and use of the idea of poverty throughout history, throughout the world. No matter what the culture, no matter what the religion, that's about it. It's all right, I gave up my physical possessions. And that's it. And they'll be applauded by those to whom they were seeking spiritual refuge or instruction. They may be applauded, or at least their behavior found to be acceptable by their general community. That, yes, that is something. That you gave up your physical possession. You start moving into a very smaller percentage of those who might do it or even talk about it, and they begin to get into the idea of trying to give up or trying to pursue a poverty of desire for possessions. One of the clear aspects, is no great importance, is at least the way it's remembered, is Buddha's. Well, Jesus did it too. But at any rate, of pointing out that it's not just the possessions that you're trying to give up, because that's not really the problem. That after, I'll stick words in his mouth or redo it, it doesn't matter who it was, that after a lifetime of trying to pursue that kind of enlightenment, now that he sees what it is, that while he started out believing that physical possessions could be a hindrance to this kind of pursuit, he sees now that it's not the possessions, it was the desire for possessions. It was the attachment. Just 2 or 3% of the people who would ever pay any attention to this. Remember, it's in the high 90s those that would, if they paid it any, they gave it any attention, much less if they attempted to participate in some way with in an involvement with the exercise of poverty. It would be on the basis of poverty of possessions, physical possessions. A few, a very small percent, of the same aforementioned groups that might be interested, a group of people who might be interested in such as I'm describing, they would take it a bit further and would say, no, it's not just possessions. That may be the first step, that may be a necessary step, but now I see what it is. They either say that they see it, or else they began to read into some of the mystical literature in the world. They begin to read into it a deeper description, a deeper understanding. They believe they found that what the Buddhas and the Jesuses, Mohammeds, and etc., and all the traditions we're speaking of was not simply, was not just poverty of possessions, it was a poverty of desire for possessions. That can strike many people as a major breakthrough. And again, I'm not going to question it. If that's the way it seems to people, it is. But there is even steps beyond that. The steps on the idea of giving up possessions, you find very crude, I might point out, reflections that even in public religions. In the Western world, I guess one of the great ones being, if you can understand it, Jesus pointing out that whatever you did in your heart is the way they translate it here in Western language, that if you murdered a man in your heart, if you stole his possessions, if you lusted after his wife in your heart, and you didn't actually do anything about it, you didn't try to hit on his old lady, you didn't try to go and actually steal what he had, but you wanted to, you and God knows it. So the thing was, they interpreted, at least in the fundamentalist variety of Christianity in the West, they interpret that as, well, you might as well have done it. As far as God concerned, he looked down your heart, he saw that you wanted that man's wife, that you wanted his possessions, that you hated him so bad that you killed him. As far as God's concerned, you might as well have done it. They cannot really do a lot with that at the high 90% level, that is the common level, because common, physical, simple people, it just will not fit. You cannot do anything with it. Not only can you not run with it, that's the kind of ball you can't even pick up. You can't even find where the playing field is. Because if you tried to tell an ordinary man, not an ordinary Christian, but an ordinary man anywhere on this planet pursuing any community religion, and you told him, and they all got basically the same requirements, which is simply civil requirements. Don't kill, don't steal, etc. So if you're a Hindu, a Jew, a Muslim, things you never heard of, that they all have got basically that. But then if you tried to tell those people, which was the extent of their interest in being religious or in understanding life, and if you told them, all right, now you people, you know all the rules, you know the commandments about don't steal, don't kill, don't fornicate with your, don't engage in fornication. And they go, yeah. And then they tell them, well, wait a minute, by the way, we've had a new revelation. We've got new information came in from the home office up in heaven. God said that it's one thing not to actually steal from somebody. But now he told me to tell you that if you want to steal from somebody, it's the same thing. Now that's the end of their religion, that's the end of their culture, that's the end of their civilization. Everybody's going to run off in every kind of different direction like Bugs Bunny from Yosemite Sam or somebody. They're going to absolutely go to pieces because an ordinary mind cannot do anything with that. You might as well tell an ordinary mind, quit thinking. But the idea, you can still find in print, you can find people still repeating it, that it's not simply a giving up of physical possessions, that the real attempt is the giving up of the desire. And they have played with that for years in different languages. The desire is almost like telling the mind not to stop. telling the mind to stop thinking. And so one of the lesser variations, taking out some of the cholesterol and some of the salt, is they say instead of desire is attachment. To try and give up your inclination to be attached, not physically, not to hold on to the possession, because we're assuming you got through the first stage that you're at least paying lip service to the idea that giving up of possessions could be a benefit. Whether you do it or not, you say, yes, it just sounds right, it feels right. Then to say, well, the real trick is to give up the desire for possessions. That would be the same thing as telling ordinary people, you've done pretty good not killing each other, but God told me to tell you from now on, if you want to kill somebody, it's the same thing. You're in the same, you might as well have done it. You're no better off. That would be the end of everything in that locale. In the same way, it would be the end of everything if you insisted to people, or you got them to agreeing, to even attempting to live on the basis that the less possessions you have, the better off you are. The more of a real man, the more you might be able to develop your own individuality, your own understanding. They go, yeah. You go, all right, somewhere down the road, let's assume that they've made some change collectively, that they are no longer the possession-driven people that they were. And then the priest, the head of the tribe, the prime minister, whoever it is, comes back and he says, by the way, I've got new information. We've done good, evidently, that we're less tied to, we're less possession-driven than we were in the past, but now the secret information, God has sent me down the new information that's not enough not to simply be driven by possessions, but now we've got to give up the desire for possessions. It won't work. It would destroy everything, and so they have come up with a sort of a middle of the road, kind of a light version of that. Well, the attachment, which you can interpret as being leaving you free to desire it because it's natural, but to be all involved, which makes it real easy because most people's desire far outreaches their ability to acquire. And so if you say, well, it's all right to want to be rich, to have the desire to be rich, but don't get too attached to it. Don't let that, just don't be attached to the desire. The desire is just part of our carnal, basic, physical, human nature. Or if they really knew what they're doing, they'd say it was probably some sort of holdover from the mammalian territorial prerogative, and that's coming out in possessions, desire for possessions. But you tell the people, you don't have to give up the desire. I mean, be good, but it's not really the desire. It's the attachment. You understand? Which gives you permission to fail. In other words, it gives you permission to go ahead and desire to be rich, but since most people are not going to be rich, then you can say, well, I'm not all that attached to it. It didn't kill me. I wanted to be as rich as the guy next door. I wanted to be as rich as the king. I wanted to be as successful as so-and-so, but here I am, I'm 55 and I'm not. So at least it showed I wasn't that attached to it. It would have driven me crazy. There's another level. The other level is not only the poverty. If you follow this, it's no mathematical, strictly mathematical importance, and there's not going to be a test on it. But if you see it as going through the stages of the poverty, of going from it specifically relating to possessions, actual physical possessions, gold, houses, just physical possessions. If it goes from that, the next level would be the poverty of trying to give up the desire for the possessions. And then the next one would be the attachment, which is sort of a variation. But now comes the one where everything, as some great philosopher said, all hell breaks loose. It's giving up preference. Now this is still in a kind of, I'll admit, oblique sequential expansion that has gone from, let's say we're way past possessions, that's not driving everyone. which don't take too much credit, because the truth is most of you are at such an age now that you've given up the desire to be rich, to have what it is you want at 20. So do not throw your shoulder out of joint trying to pat yourself on the back. Most of you have sort of blundered into, because of the aging of hormones, you kind of blundered in somewhere in the general vicinity of the third stage I mentioned, or 2.5 of attachment. So going, well, yeah, I wanted to be rich. I didn't think there's anything wrong with it, but at least by God I survived. Here I am at the age of 40, and I didn't let it drive me crazy, because I'm still going around to theosophy meetings, or I'm still meditating. I still go out to now read New Age books or whatever you do, and you go, so at least I didn't let it kill me. Yeah, because you failed. So don't take too much credit. Well, don't take any credit. That was a figure of speech. You knew what I meant. Don't take too much credit. Beyond attachment would be this other stage that at first can sound simple, and I know that it even gets reprinted in books. It's been hanging around for years and years, but is giving up preference. When I say that this is a kind of sequence and kind of an expansion, you understand there is no such thing except in 3D engines, which is limited reality. There is no such thing as absolute sequence in a three-dimensional reality. There has to appear to be, is the way the mind works, but it is not that one is an extension in a superior, in a qualitative sense than the other. But it gets more difficult to perceive, more difficult to consider. The next one is trying to have poverty of preference. Now, rather than going in a sequential line, even up the apex toward a higher level, even the simple have dragged that back and used it on the basis of even back to the first stage of poverty, the concept of the use of poverty, of not only giving up possessions, not only trying to give up possessions and the desire for possessions, but then they hear the idea of trying to give up, have poverty of preference. And then you think, well, wait a minute. A simple, ordinary person could go, now I'm getting somewhere. Even a simple, ordinary person that believes that they are in the weekend or part-time involved with some imaginary spiritual quest, mystical quest, they can then take that to mean, all right, instead of me wanting all my life what I wanted, to tell you the truth, was a Jaguar. I mean, now they're about building them like God intended they should look, and they got the wiring system finally fixed up. And I always wanted one, and see, that's possessions, but unless somebody's been on a little mystical quest, plus they failed, you're 50 years old and you don't have a Jaguar, so hold your breath that you're ever going to get one, or a Maserati, in case any of you could actually afford a Jaguar. And so then this person hears the idea that, wait a minute, there's another layer of this interpretation of the idea of poverty, and it'd be a poverty of preference. And then they can say, wait a minute, that is, I mean, you almost have to have a car. Now, I'm not that attached to my car. Of course, all this is still based on the premise that you've never had the car you wanted, that you dreamed of. But you can hear the idea then of a poverty of preference and think, well, and you take it right back to the most basic physical level, that I have made some progress, because I interpret that to mean that it shouldn't matter whether you have a Jaguar or just a Toyota. That does sound right. No. Poverty of preference. Well, what else could it mean? Well, there's a little side branch I have to point out that's of no great importance, but people do still pursue it, at least talk about it, and some physically try to pursue it, and that is the idea, but it's back at the most simplistic level, that they take the idea of a poverty of preference to be, well, I don't care what happens to me. And that turns into such dreams as the Tibetan monks or yogis sitting up in the Himalayan mountains nude in snowstorms, and they don't care. They sit out there for hours, days. They live out there. They don't care what happens. They don't care what they eat. They'll eat worms. They'll eat bark. They don't care how they look. They don't care whether people laugh at them. They don't care whether no woman would date them on a bet. And it all sounds like that is some sort of progress, because I am so touchy myself, the person might say, that I'm constantly worried about my looks. I'm saving up money. Since I can't get a Jaguar or Maserati, at least I'm saving up money. I'm going to get a hair transplant. I'm going to get a nose, a liposuction on my lipo, or lippos, hippos. And I'm always worried about my clothes. I spend too much on my clothes, and then they can hear the idea of a poverty of preference, and immediately they think, well, that would be it. It would be a kind of indifference, which almost sounds, we're back to all mythical heroes. We're back all the way from Western mythical heroes to Greek and religious heroes, is a poverty of preference and indifference. They just don't seem to give a damn. Not in some real hostile manner, because that, of course, is conflicting directly with a hero, but it's the sort of guy that just rides into town. Let me just wrap it up. Western hero, but you can fill in Atlas and Alexander and every yogi, every samurai, every hero you ever heard of. But imagine he comes riding into town. Just think about the heroes. They're not vain. You don't see him always looking in the mirror. He doesn't seem to care how he dresses. In fact, they won't make fun of it, make him appear to, well, he seems to have no particular preference, seems to be indifferent. Whether he rides into town, the people point at him, they look at him. Whether he asks, where can I get a good room? And he stops at the best hotel in town, and they look at him and go, no, go down to Mrs. So-and-so, go sleep in the barn. We'll give me a quarter and you can stay in the stable. He just doesn't seem to care. He might say, no, and he'd just take a room, or he might not. He does not seem to care. You do not find heroes, and check with your own nervous system. It's not just the doings of our writers of fiction and mythology. It's not the culture. It's not anything out there. It's a combination of the fish and the water, but look into your own nervous system. That there is a kind of indifference. But they've still missed it, because you're back to indifference at what level? The physical level. But it still sounds right that people are prepared not only to give up their physical possessions to go into a monastery, to pursue some spiritual discipline, but they will also try and give up, if the particular school or monastery or tradition to which they align themselves, if it said not only you have to give up your possessions, but when you get in here, by the way, nobody really cares what you think, how you feel. We know it's cold in here. We don't have heat. We don't have air conditioning. We don't have any mattresses on the bed. They're boards. We know all of that. Don't bother to come in here. And the food's the same every day as gruel. Gruel, gruel, gruel. On Thanksgiving, you get double portions of gruel. So that's it. And we all wear the same clothes. We cut each other's hair, or you can let it grow out until it strangles you. We don't care. But I don't hear any of that. You've got to give it up. And that sounds right. And it even sounds not only right, that's the kind of thing that a would-be mystic can even handle. In the same way that a would-be mystic, just a small-time guy, 50 years old, 60 years old, can give up his possessions. What's he going to do with them anymore? He's not interested in sex. He couldn't get laid if he wanted to, except by a 60-year-old woman, and we won't go into that. Little joke for all you 60-year-old men. Don't you 60-year-old women write me complaining. The point is, he can give up that kind of possessions, but then they can say, well, give up vanity. That is, give up preference is what it amounts to. And they can go, all right, I can do that. Well, sure, he can do that. Even if he's not 60. I didn't mean to just blame it on age. Even if it's somebody younger and says, well, that does sound right. Because it's not limited to simply old people, the hormones running down. I didn't mean that. Because you've got people who do hear the idea of being indifferent, having a poverty of preference, and it strikes them as admirable. It strikes them as being a proper method, if not the method. in the whole dreams of, that there is a teacher somewhere sitting in Tibet or in China out in the snow, up in a cave, and he's been there for years, and the elements do not seem to affect him. The natural flow of nature does not seem to affect him. My, my, my. How astounding. I'll save my money and go there. It just seems right. It is the same simple level as giving up your car, giving up your possession to go in a monastery. That was the sidetrack I said that some people have taken that to be. What does a poverty of preference mean? Is anybody going to ask? All right. Are you ready? It means that you do not care what your mind thinks. There is the poverty. There is the true poverty of possessions, which is what the first two stages that ordinary minds have tried to make it be like. Well, it's not just the possessions, although that is the first step, but it's your desire for them, your attachment. What does all that mean? What are they trying to say? Even at, which I told you is still a fairly simplistic level, is to give up your desire or your attachment. Only somebody extremely simple of mind would take attachment to be, well, my hand has now grown and merged with this bar of gold. Or my hand is now, I love the steering wheel of this Maserati so much that my hand is now affixed permanently. Now, you know that's not it. It's up here. Everyone knows that. I mean, if it's pointed out for a second, and they're interested in such matters. You say, well, the idea of attachment didn't mean physically. It meant that internally somewhere. In the past, they've always been wanting to refer to it as spiritually being attached. It is mentally being attached, because if you don't think about a Maserati, let's say you got one. Let's say that your uncle died and left you a Maserati. Finally, now you're happy. And sometime tonight, you're trying to fix a glove box, and your hand slipped and you fell down and drove the screwdriver up here and gave yourself a frontal lobotomy. And when you fell over, you'd been smoking a cigarette and you knocked it out of the ashtray and it burned the Maserati up. 2 hours after you had it, and somebody came and pulled you out, and you now have a frontal lobotomy. In other words, you can't think about the Maserati. Does anybody understand that by one definition you are now a mystic insofar as possessions, because you do not care. I mean, easy come, easy go, there it is. All your life you want a Maserati. You had one for 2 hours, and through just a dumb accident, through your own clumsiness, you killed the car. You blew it in 2 hours, your own fault. And there you sit. In one sense, you resemble someone more conscious, at least insofar as you understand. That won't do. You know that. Well, I say that, and if you want to give yourself a homemade lobotomy, then it will do. I mean, go ahead. At least you're not going to come back and complain to me that you don't like it, because you're never going to complain again. For those of you suffering from the sulfuric gases of the red acids, that will always cure that. But back to the subject. The true poverty, you understand? Because ordinary people, even if they get to the level to hear about the idea of poverty of preference, they go, yeah, well, it would be that you don't care that much about, what you think. Verbal act gets by as close as you can get. I mean, you're skating right up to Tonya Hardy's kneecap. I mean, you're skating to the terminal edge, but you're never going to fall over it, because the poverty of preference in thought is you do not care. And that still doesn't explain it, because I can take it a bit further. Assuming anybody will try and listen. Because right there, most people stop. Most minds stop. It's just a matter of gravity, a matter of need, a matter of the way that you're wired up. You can't help it. I can't help it. The girl can't help it. Richard Penniman could have helped it when he wrote it, but in fact he didn't even write it. So here we go. But he sang it. And I couldn't think who wrote it, so there. Bobby Short. Bobby Troop, not Bobby Short. Does anyone have any idea what this has to do with great mystical traditions? I do. I just don't know about you. I just said that to let you off the hook. If you try to take the best that a man can normally come up with intellectually, even someone interested in such as this, and you get it to the idea that the true poverty that resonates in everyone's nervous system, even at a very simple level such as heroes, heroes in movies, literature, all the way to religious heroes, of this idea of poverty, going from possessions into the idea of the desire for possessions, of you mentally driving yourself crazy wanting possessions, whether you have them or not. And people go, yeah, I can see that. It would be not only giving up of possessions, if you had to, or if it seemed to serve a purpose for the time being, but then being able to go past that and give up thinking about them all the time. Now I see what you mean. The desire, the attachment. Yeah, okay. But then pass out is you have no preference. Now remember, we got them now. Being the charitable fool that I am, making up the example. We've gotten to the point now that whoever I'm talking about, this ordinary mind I'm speaking of. And he says, yes, I got it. It's not just the giving up of possessions, even though I could do that, or even though it might serve a purpose, and I go, yeah, it might, to start with. But then, it's past the possession, it's up here. It's mental. Forget spiritual and in your heart, God knows whether you're actually coveting your neighbor's Cadillac. Forget all that. It's up here. I mean, it's demonstratively simple. It's a screwdriver, that's it. Blow on the head, and you're a Christian. Or there you lay in that catatonic state, you're whatever they say you are. I mean, you fit the qualification, you will not break the commandments of any known religion. I mean, there you are, the only person that, everybody that passes through that hospital, you're the only person that will ever be, or even come close to meeting the requirements of a, and fill in, whatever religion, Jew, Christian, Muslim, there you are. So that's it, this, forget the heart, as you know. But we got an ordinary mind, or one that believes he's gone this far with a conversation. And I say that past that is not just the intellectual attachment and being continually held by this, that it's like an idée fixe, you keep wanting possessions. Even though you don't have them, even though you're not out there trying to steal, you keep thinking about them. They drive you crazy. Yeah, I see that. And it's, again, it sounds correct if it has to be pointed out to this kind of mind, to say, well, that is in conflict with attempting to awaken to some other state of consciousness, to understand what life is about, the enlightenment, Satori. And they go, you can't deny it. And they go, yeah, that's true. That is intellectually trying to become somewhat impoverished, or at least to break, to weaken the ties here between this and actual possessions. So we can get them that far. But you understand that is still preferential. That is still selective, whether they can do it or not. But just in theory, that is still a selective form of poverty. That, yes, I need to, I'm speaking for the mind now. This ordinary person needs to go, yeah, I got it. Is I should not be thinking all the time, whatever his particular field of potential attachments to possessions are, cars, wealth, fame. You go, I see it. I should not be that tied to my particular vice, my particular weak spot. It's all people can do to intellectually, that is theoretically, go, yeah, I can see that. But if you go past that and say, no. Now if you got that, you're ready for a bigger bozo. It's not trying to free yourself from mental attachment to that, or that, or that. It's to stop preferring anything. And don't let them. Then they might jump in and say, oh, you're going to say it doesn't matter whether I'm real good looking, whether I'm overweight, and I shouldn't be vain. Nuh-uh. That's the way out. Back to this. And the mind will still go. The best of people, the best of minds will go, well, you're just repeating yourself. That you're saying don't be attached to certain thoughts about things. No, see, he made the sentence too long again. And they will try their best. Try it yourself. This is not an argument between me, between you and I. It's not an argument between me and imaginary minds. But the mind says, I hear it, but you keep repeating the same thing over and over, that I should not be mentally attached to certain possessions, certain ideas, certain things I want. No, no, no. The sentence went way too far. You can dispense with most of the words of that sentence. It is poverty of preference, and it's not physical. Now, we've established that, and I'm assuming you're past that. We're talking about strictly an intellectual affair. It is a poverty of preference. Poverty of, 3 words. I thought I was right. Sense makes sense. It's diagrammable. You understand what it says. Poverty of preference. And the best mind, the best that the mind can do under routine circumstances, if it listens and took it to be of some potential import, and it would think and go, well, that's what I just asked you. No, no, no. It's not. It is not what men ordinarily think, even those attempting to pursue some mystical investigation, some metaphysical consideration of the nature of life and man. If they hear the idea, and it's presented even as an intellectual matter, that the real poverty is having poverty of preference, you can give them the nod, and they can be reading it in a book. They could read the words and go, ah, ah. But they immediately select themselves. It's the nature of the mind, what it is that they should not have preferential thoughts about. I discounted it when I said that it was of no consequence. The idea that many would-be mystics have, that there's a kind of desirable indifference that a truly more awakened or enlightened man would have, such as sitting out in the snow or in the elements, and you don't have to be dressed up, and you don't have to stay warm, you don't have to have air conditioning. That sounds right, and I dismissed it. All right, we'll undismiss it. If you could do that same thing mentally, that's not the enlightenment, but that's close. How simple can it be? Well, I know, without any doubt, that many people that hear this, that you get right there and you think, and sometimes you do see something for a split second, but notice it's snatched right back. It's like, if I'm not getting my public figures, it's like Harding's husband suddenly lays it on your kneecaps. And you're back, you think, well, I almost saw it. I saw something, but then it was gone so fast, it was like an atomic blast, and it just sort of blinded me, and now I'm back where I was. I know. What if you could take the idea of absolute physical indifference, which would be suicidal, but the idea, which appeals to many people, all the way from would-be mystics to heroes again, just common, popular heroes. If you took the idea of an actual physical indifference, which is simple enough, the concept, and applied it mentally, then you'd have something. One of the simple, there's a great simple physical version. It's been floating around for thousands of years, and the latest rendition is in Western culture, Protestantism, a gospel song, the latest version, been around for 40, 50 years, is "Who is going down in the grave with me?" And singers sing it, "Who is going down in the grave with me?" And the idea being that you better live. Of course, now I'm taking it from a Christian context to start with. Their idea is you better live, try to live the way God wants you to, that is, a higher state of consciousness, or somebody more perceptive. But if you don't live like God wants you to, and you start to die, you're not going to have any friends. And then it's kind of a sarcastic, who's going down the grave? You know, is your Cadillac, you spent all your life working to get a new Cadillac or a Maserati, now you're dying. You are dead, we're about to bury you. Who's your friends? Is your Maserati going to come up and go, commit sati and throw itself and stab itself in its little carburetor or fuel pumps, fuel injectors, and fall down in the grave with you? Is all your clothes, is your home going to come and see what's happening and just burn itself to ashes and throw itself on top of you? Nobody's going in the grave. But then even those that apparently are a little more philosophical would think, well, my belief system, my theories of life, the thoughts that I have preferred to think, the paradigms, the intellectual, the mental paradigms I've had of life and how it should be, they're going in the grave with me, I hope. That is, they will carry me through. They will sustain me in some way. Of course, the religious trust that their belief system will literally sustain them. That, oh yeah, I'm going to die and they're going to bury me, but then, according to whatever your particular cult is, that next week or a split second later or 4 months later, whatever it is, I'll come back to life and I'll be in a great place. That my system, what I thought about, the thoughts that I preferred, will carry me through. That I thought Christian thoughts. I thought godly thoughts. I thought guys for the good guys rather than for the bad guys, and so it will sustain me. Consider it again. I don't have time to beat this one much further. Who is going down the grave with me is a very old idea. You can find it in Greek philosophy. But it just sounds good in a certain way, and it sounds up to date to hear somebody sing it, and a good electric guitar player and a drummer. Who is going down in the grave with me? Who's going down in the grave with me? Who's going down in the grave with me when I die? And the most common kind of folkish version, they go through verses. It's not a great deal of verbal interest and variety, but then they'll sing a verse, is your car going down? And then the next verse, and they sing the chorus. It goes on, they can drag it out for hours. And they can go through everything in life that a physical, ordinary man would consider make life worthwhile. Is your CD collection going in the grave? No. How about even your old vinyl albums? That'd be another, you can drag it out for another verse. No, they're not going. Consider this. The song is still about poverty, but it's not about possessions. I mean, it is at that simple level. What they're singing about is the fact that thoughts, no conditions here, no asterisks, no conditions. Thoughts aren't going, thoughts ain't going down the grave with nobody. Thoughts do not bury themselves. And that is what people are singing about. Now, somebody could be dying and think that they'd like to hear that song because they're hoping, again, that their belief system, that is, the thoughts that they've preferred to think or that now they prefer, or they wish they'd preferred to think, they're hoping it'll go with them. But I'm telling you what's in the human nervous system that makes the whole thing attractive. Is you wish that your thoughts would go down in the grave. Thoughts ain't going nowhere. Thoughts are not going to go in the grave. Which is what people are also trying to do with the idea of conversion, ordinary people. That I will go in some way, I will stand up and I'll say, yes, I am, from this day forward, I am a Lutheran, I am a Muslim, and yes, they shake your hand and give you a card or a button. You go, yes, that's me now. And what you're hoping is that thoughts that you don't prefer are going to the grave, that they're going to be buried in this conversion, which is a grave, that I am now rid of that. What all religions do not like to point out is, well, most of them don't know it. It's a secret code that's been passed around. But it's a kind of background dynamic to all religions called FC, fat chance, except they don't know what to make of it. But insofar as the thoughts, no one's thoughts are going down in the grave with you. That is, they're not going to bury themselves in you through any ordinary method. They're not. Well, you can do this. You can kill them that way, but you understand you've killed you with a frontal lobotomy from being a human. I would refer you back to a man that selected his own name, picked out his own name. He changed his name to 630 so that he would never be late. That was the conclusion of, that was the climax. And I knew you would scream. I knew you would holler to where would he in the next room that, ah! So that he would never be late. Thoughts are never late. Thoughts are never early. But that can't be true, right? Because you're always thinking, well, they are. Why do I think that? Get away from here, you old naughty roach. I'm sorry, thought. You old naughty Toyota. Oh, it's even worse. It's a Corvair. It's a nice Rambler. Where's my Maserati? Get away, get away. If you change your name to 6:30, you'll never be late. I'm glad I had that extra few seconds to clear that up.